I always have to laugh when Chamber or anybody wants to call me and say, do you want to go through the poll? I'm like, I don't need a poll to know that people think we suck. So
got it.
I got that.
City Council President Deborah Juarez there, never one to mince words, talking about the challenges of being a council member in Seattle. How will that blunt assessment about the council's popularity play out in this week's primary election? And how will the council respond to Mayor Bruce Harrell's new plan to create a new city law responding to drug use and drug possession with treatment and criminal penalties? And on top of that, is the city of Seattle ready for the World Cup in 2026, a new partnership building on that front as well? Welcome, everybody, to Seattle News, Views, and Brews, your coffee break political podcast. I'm Brian Callanan. I'm a host on Seattle Channel. The views expressed here are mine, all mine. My co-host is the ever-intrepid David Croman, transportation reporter for the Seattle Times. And David, I saw my Twitter feed. It had a lead story, and I didn't even know it was there, but the hens you have in your coop at home have finally started laying eggs. What's going on at the Croman farm?
Yeah, we got these a few months ago, and they seemed stubborn about ever wanting to give us eggs. But just in the last few days, they've decided to. At least one of them has decided to start laying, and so now we've got farm fresh eggs in our fridge.
I love it, man. Those are tasty. I'm waiting for the omelet report in a couple weeks here, but we'll get back to that. Thank you, David, as always, for joining me. Thanks to our background noise sponsor, City Grind Espresso on the first floor of City Hall. Thanks also to our show patrons. Claire jumped on board recently at the $5 a month level. We sent her a Seattle News, Views, and Brews decal, and check it out. Now her water bottle has never looked better. Claire, we are stuck on you too. Patrons, send in your sticker shots to Seattle News, Views, and Brews, spell them all out, at gmail.com. You can see that photo as part of the video version of our podcast, snazzy graphics and everything on Converge Media. Converge airs the show Wednesday nights at 7 o'clock. All right, off we go with right here, right now. Well, let's tackle the mayor's new drug enforcement/drug treatment plan first here. This was released early this week. As you will recall, folks, the city council rejected a measure in June with a 5-4 vote, very close vote, to codify the new state law that makes possession and public use of illicit drugs gross misdemeanors. So the mayor has a new plan now, putting $27 million towards enhanced treatment facilities, gives the city attorney the right to prosecute these cases, and a big one for me here, directs the Seattle Police Department to put together a policy stating that diversion and referral is the preferred response to possession and public use of illicit drugs, while acknowledging that sometimes arrests are warranted. I want to put that last issue on the side for just a second, David, and get to the meat of this. Is this going to get support of the council? I know they're trying to jam this in if they can before the council's summer recess on August 21st.
Yeah, I think it's got a pretty good shot. Andrew Lewis was really close to voting for the last proposal, but at the last minute decided not to. In part, he said because it didn't come with any sort of additional language or resources for treatment or diversion. This has that. That's a change. I would say $27 million in the grand scheme of things for treatment, which is a pretty expensive thing to run, is not actually that much. It's also a little novel for the city of Seattle. There's kind of generally more of a county thing to provide treatment or mental health services or things like that. So I wouldn't expect $27 million is really going to turn the tide on this thing, but it is sort of represents an investment where there was zero before. And I'll also say I would think that Bruce Harrell, he was on the council for a long time. It didn't look great for City Hall, at least in the eyes of a lot of people, when they rejected the last measure, and so I would think that he wouldn't want to bring something forward without at least a fair amount of confidence that it could get passed and make it to his desk. Just because, that's sort of a rule of politics, is you don't bring anything for a vote unless you're pretty confident you'd have the votes. And so I would say the fact that he's making this reveal would at least suggest some confidence that he thinks he can get support for it.
Yeah, I'm sure that he's got that support. And I'm just wondering about that police part, though, because I've talked to the mayor about this policy myself, and his whole thought is, okay, we need to give clarity to police officers. He uses that word a lot. So is this person who's using drugs, etc., is that a public safety, public health problem? And this is a big phrase here, but how much of a problem is that if someone is doing that in front of a business? What if that person is doing that way out on Pier 62 or something, not close to anybody? Who is that person affecting with their drug use, etc.? And I'm looking at that whole concept of clarity, and I just wonder how this is going to work out for police, because I know they're looking for clarity in terms of, okay, should we arrest this person? Should we not? It's just a really difficult thing. And I think this idea of crafting policy for the SPD is going to be tough.
Yeah, I agree. And it's, it doesn't, at least as far as I can tell, it doesn't come with a lot of binding language necessarily. You're offering policy language to the Seattle Police Department that sort of dictates or encourages a certain kind of subjective choice, but doesn't require it. I would think that, we know for better or worse that the police make decisions based on what they think might happen on the other side.
They have to.
They make an arrest, think, if they don't believe that certain drug possession arrests or whatever are going to end up getting prosecuted, then the police will say, they stop making some of those arrests. You can agree or disagree with that line of thinking, but it does appear to be the case. And so, in this sense, I would think that the same rationale might be applied to whether or not, if they're diverting or whatever that looks like, or referring people to treatment. I would think that they would only make that decision if they felt like that was legitimately an option and was legitimately something that was gonna happen.
Yeah, and I guess too, that's the other shoe that needs to drop here. We need to hear something from the city attorney's office, because that was not contained in this press release from Mayor Harrell here. That office, the city attorney's office, needs to figure out something that resembles some sort of court system that could handle these gross misdemeanors. And I think that's the other piece of it. These different legislative sides of the city, they cannot compel the judicial side with the city attorney's office to be doing these things. So that's the part of it that I'm interested in seeing next. And it really feels like the ball is in city attorney Ann Davison's court. Yeah,
it does. I think it's interesting. She's been in office now for almost 2 years. I guess a year and a half, really. And, her election was a bit of a sea change for that office. She used to be a Republican and kind of ran on this platform of cracking down on low-level crimes like this a little harder. But in some ways, there's been some backroom conflicts, but this drug possession debate seems to be the kind of first or at least the largest public display of what we got when we elected her as city attorney. And so, I think it'll be very telling of the kind of office she's running, sort of how she approaches this.
Yeah, no, this is a big question mark ahead here, and this is how this plan will be unfolding with the cooperation of her office. All right, well, moving on to our next topic here. We're talking primary election, of course, and that's what's happening this week. We are releasing this show early Tuesday on primary election day, so no results just yet, other than the fact that maybe 1 out of 3 of us actually got around to voting in King County. The turnout numbers, just around 18.4% on Tuesday morning countywide, on track for about a 30% overall turnout, which is in line with what we see for most of these odd-year elections. And David, I always look at this voter turnout issue. It bothers me and it baffles me. We have these big races for city council here in Seattle. All the cities across the county really have races like these, and people just don't show up. What does that say to you?
Yeah, I mean, it says to me it's the middle of summer. It's a Tuesday. I think that alone sort of puts a certain ceiling on how many people are going to show up. I do think that there's a sense of feeling a little overwhelmed. There's 7 city council seats up for election, a lot of people not running again, so there aren't a lot of familiar names on the ballot. Frankly, there are not as many reporters as there used to be in this town, so maybe not all of these people get quite the coverage that they used to, so there's not as much information out there, I don't think, and so there's a little bit of a sense of having a hard time kind of parsing what it is you are voting on and why you should care. We'll see a bump in the general election when it's a little easier to decide between 2 people rather than between 5 or 6 or however might be in a certain race.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, it's a stubborn cap that seems to hit every August election.
It's a good point. Yeah, when you think you have 40 plus candidates in the city council races, it can be a little overwhelming for voters too. But I thought it was an interesting twist, David. King County Council, they have a few races here too, but the King County's working on this if you can't beat them, join them type maneuver. They're actually going to move their elections to even years beginning in 2026 as approved by voters last fall. Is that the answer to improve turnout, to have them with those midterm elections, with the presidential election year? How do you change the trend, I guess, is what I'm saying.
Yeah, I do think that will probably help. There are I think there are some potential downsides to that too, which is that, I mean, if part of the concern is having too many candidates on the ballot,
Sure,
I think that's
right,
really
crowded ballot. Mm-hmm.
I think that's really going to be the case. I mean, maybe not as much with just the county, but you can imagine if the city or whatever switched to even year also, then suddenly you're voting on president, Congress, Senate, the legislature, and county and city seats. I mean, that's hundreds of candidates probably you're parsing through.
Sure.
If you think it's hard to cover a city council race, the coverage on that is going to get stretched really thin. So there are certain disadvantages to that. At the same time, it is just a fact that more people show out for federal elections than they do for local elections. So you would get more votes on these races than you would otherwise. And, you know, I mean, what's this one going to end up being? What, like 30 some percent? That's not great. So if your argument is to have a truly representative government in Seattle, it's hard to argue that 35% turnout is actually representative of the people who live here.
Yeah, I know. And this is me being a whiny public affairs host for Seattle Channel, but covering 7 different council races during a fall. It's crazy. It's just so much. And it's going to represent a potentially a pretty big turnover, as we've talked about, for the Seattle City Council. 8 seats, really, when you think about it, if Teresa Mosqueda is successful in her run for county council. So we'll see what happens with the council there. We'll follow up on this next week on the podcast, folks, I promise. I did want to pass along some brief housekeeping notes. Councilmember Sawant's rent control measure on its way to getting rejected this week by the council. The supplemental budget also in process, as we reported last week, amid a bit of an unsettled economic outlook. We'll keep tabs on that as well. All right, moving on here. Up next, Seattle's battle with gun violence continues after a shooter targets a group that is dedicated to bring back peace to the streets. Another chapter in a very difficult story coming up on Now Hear This. Well, stories about shootings in Seattle are always difficult, and we're seeing a spike in gun violence yet again this summer. But a shooting this past week caught my attention because a shooter apparently targeted a Safeway parking lot in the 9200 block south of Rainier Avenue that has been the home to an anti-violence and anti-poverty program for the past 3 years. It's called a community healing space. Food is handed out there. People come together and literally sit in healing circles and talk about their community. Plus, a group called Safe Passage, unarmed people walking around this neighborhood, help kids walk to their home after school. They walk around the area. They help adults out too. One of the program supervisors, Marty Jackson, talked to me about this program last year and the success they have had in this particular parking lot.
What we're doing is we are embracing our community. We're loving on our community. You're welcome. Safeway reported out that there were 12 incidents, shots fired in the Safeway parking lot in 2020. And in 2021, since we've been in that space, January 29th, there's been 0 incidents.
Well, unfortunately, the Seattle Times reports 2 members of the Safe Passage team were shot, 3 others as well at this community outreach event. A lot of injuries, no one killed is the latest report there. On top of all this, though, there's a pending lawsuit from a family of a bystander who was killed in this parking lot in 2020, saying this lot is a magnet for violence. And David, I'm bringing this up because I'm not sure what the answer is for this particular space. It's a big, sprawling parking lot. If you've ever been down there, it basically goes around a whole street corner. Not a great thing from a public safety perspective. But you have people trying to activate this space, too, to try to make it a more peaceful place. And then we still have incidents like this. Is a lawsuit against Safeway somehow the answer here? How do you protect a space like this and steer violence away from it?
Yeah, God, I never know how to react to these. You know, I mean, it is there. I suppose there's an argument that it's the responsibility of the owners of the space to make their area more safe. I think there's a lot more systemic problems here than just Safeway's parking lot. But, you know, I think that's probably what Safeway will argue is, you know, they can only sort of control what happens in their little bubble, but you know, there's a lot going on in the rest of the city. So, you know, it's a heartbreaking thing, especially considering the goals of this, you know, gathering that were happening. I frankly don't know.
I know. I've always asked you the impossible question on this one, David, and I just bring it up because it was so heartbreaking for me. I did a really in-depth story about Safe Passage and all the work that's been going on down there, and I really think the group has turned a corner in a lot of ways in terms of preventing more violent activity from happening there. But here we are this summer, and I'm just trying to figure out other things that the city can do. We have talked about the gun violence task force that Chief Diaz has set up for the Seattle Police Department. What other kind of city resources could be dedicated here? Because I know this is a big focus for the city, especially in South Seattle, which has been ravaged by violence over the past several years. What can the city do is my question.
Yeah, I mean, this is the $1 million question. I mean, we have the argument for more police, of course. People disagree with that. More community building, more outreach, more kind of violence disruption. Kind of one of the big issues is that, a lot of times today's victims are tomorrow's shooters, and because there's a cycle of retaliation and trying to break that up. So there's a slate of options that I think are sort of well defined at this point, and none of them have proven to be a silver bullet by any stretch.
Yeah. And I look at this too, and I just think about the work that's been going on in the Rainier Beach neighborhood and other neighborhoods too when it comes to this. How difficult does it make that community building work when an actual program that is supposed to be working against this, unfortunately, is affected by gun violence? I have to think that makes this job a lot more difficult in terms of that community building that needs to go on.
Yes, I agree.
Yeah, I know. There I go asking the impossible questions again. David, thank you for working with me on this one. I did want to make sure we covered that because it's a difficult trend that Seattle's dealing with right now when it comes to gun violence. And so there we have it. Rainier Beach, hang in there. We'll continue to talk through this issue. All right, I want to head to some lighter news. Why don't we here? The Seattle City Council is hearing from a group this week in its governance committee about planning for the World Cup 2026. So the council made an agreement with FIFA, the World Soccer governing body, also the United States Soccer Federation back in 2022, when it was announced Seattle would be one of the host cities. So now, another committee, you always need more committees, it's getting set up this week, called a local organizing committee, joining in this agreement with the city, with FIFA, with USSF. And I wanted to bring this up, David, because we just went through an all-star game, seemed to go okay, but this is really a magnitude of difference here with these World Cup matches. Is Seattle ready for this? Or what needs to happen between now and June of 2026? I was thinking about transportation, security. What do you got? What's your biggest concern here? Sorry about that.
I figured I'd let you finish asking your question and then.
No, perfect. Yeah. Wherever you want to do that. I was just concerns about this being ready for World Cup.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is going to be sort of a bigger deal than the All-Star game because it's not just the national stage, it's a global stage. And and there are multiple, as far as I understand, I was going to say games, but I think they're called matches.
There you go. That's true.
Happening in different locations around the city, practice facilities. I'm sure there's going to be a lot of festivities. So, it's going to be a really big deal. I think, it seems like in some ways there could be sort of a World's Fair-esque push to get the city ready. I did some coverage about the, First Avenue streetcar. Downtown Seattle Association said in their ideal scenario, they could get that streetcar up and running before the World Cup. They also acknowledged that's a fairly ambitious timeline, and I don't know that Seattle has shown its ability to do things quickly like that. But, Bruce Harrell has talked about new Space Needle thinking, and he's also a big sports guy, as we saw with the All-Star game. So, if anything would kind of motivate him and City Hall to push really hard on big new investments like a streetcar, seems like the World Cup could be that.
Yeah, I think about that too. And it's interesting you mentioned Space Needle thinking because just right below the Space Needle, I think about the new municipal stadium project that's going on there at Seattle Center and getting that online perhaps in time for the World Cup. Boy, that would be a rush job there, but possible. We've seen that Oak Tree Group do a lot of things there, certainly for the Kraken's new complex. But I think about that too, David. You've got potentially the new waterfront being online by then. I think it's 2025. The waterfront should be fully up and running there. I mean, it feels like a lot of things need to fall in place, but they really could fall in place for something that could be pretty magical for the city coming up in 2026. I don't want to paint it all rosy because I know they have some stuff to deal with, but a lot of big things could be together by that point that could I don't know, could make this a good showpiece for the city.
Yeah, that's a good point about the waterfront. That should be, I mean, barring some disaster, that should be done by then.
Yeah.
And that, that's despite a lot of criticisms that I know that some people have of the large Alaskan Way, that is
Sure.
going to be a pretty impressive project, especially the connecting walkway between the aquarium and Pike Place.
Yep.
So yeah, I mean, I guess for me, it's just a question of like, is the city going to make a big push to tie some investment, some big public works project to this World Cup in the same way that the Space Needle was tied to the World's Fair. If we're talking about kind of big events as being a motivator for that, be interesting to see if the city can kind of cut through some of its red tape to make something like the streetcar happen. I think that would be the kind of like, as far as a list of projects that I can think of, the streetcar would be the kind of cornerstone, most likely project that could be the sort of rollout for this World Cup. But maybe there's something else in mind. I don't know.
Yeah, could be. We've touched on transportation here, but the public safety piece, I mean, I can't predict what things are going to be like in the city in 3 years, but when it comes to that, is that a concern? When you have that amount of people from around the world coming in, is Seattle poised to handle that piece of it? Just kind of keep these bigger crowds under control, I suppose.
Yeah, I mean, sure, it's always a concern. 2026 is a long way off, so we don't know what the kind of state of public safety will be at this point. But
right.
I think the All-Star Game showed, well, and in some ways, I think in some ways the Taylor Swift concert was probably the Taylor Swift's combo with Mariners at the same time was probably a bigger surge of people than there was for the All-Star Game. In fact, I think I heard that was the busiest 2 days in Seattle, even before 2019, not even just in pandemic era, like since 2018, those were like the busiest 2 days in Seattle. And, that and the All-Star Game, even with an apparent sick out on the part of some police officers, seemed to go pretty well, and not a lot of safety concerns or complaints. So, of course, Seattle has those, but it's a big city. Space can be opened up to accommodate that number of people.
Right. I'm really interested to see what happens with this one. That's why I brought it up for this week. But yeah, you get a real test when the Swifties come to town. That's for sure. I mean, when they start registering on the seismometers that it's even bigger than the Beast Quake, when they start shouting at Lumen Field, you got to be ready for that. All right. Well, thank you for that, David. Moving on here. Coming up, ferry riders, listen up here, folks. A new Coleman dock is opening this month. What has changed? What does this mean for commuters now and into the future? David's got the story next on Transportation Talk. All right, well, David, it's Dock Talk time. Coleman Dock, rebuilt and reopening. You wrote about this in the Times, and I didn't realize until I read your piece and looked at these photos just how massive and how challenging this project has been. You got to tear apart the old stuff, you got to build the new stuff, but keep the old system open because you can't shut it down because commuters still need to get through. What struck you about this project? Yeah,
exactly that. I mean, I think the biggest thing is just that this is such an important jumping off point, so to speak, that you could never shut it down. They redid the Mukilteo Clinton dock a few years ago.
Yeah.
But in some ways that was, they had the old dock was next to it. So they just built this next door.
A lot easier. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And then they just shut it down and move everyone over there. That's super easy. This is, in a very confined space on a single pier. They can't shut it down. So what you're doing is this kind of Tetris where you're, closing one place and doing work on there and then moving people to a new place and doing work on there. And meanwhile, it's not just that they were putting up this new building, which is quite beautiful actually. But a lot of the motivation for the project was replacing these old wooden piers pilings that were underneath the pier and deemed seismically vulnerable. And so it's not just that you're putting up this big structure over where people are. You're actually, it's like you're reflooring your house while walking around in it at the same time.
Right.
So, there's like all things massive, there's a reason why it's more than just sort of delays that this thing took 6 years, and there weren't really huge. There were maybe a few months of delay, but it just it by necessity had to take 6 years to do this because when you're trying to keep the space open, it just kind of slows things down a little bit.
Yeah, and taking things apart piece by piece. You did raise a good point here, and I will say this is a very impressive facility. Really opens up to views of the Puget Sound, which is awesome. And looking at Elliott Bay there, the way they've oriented the building, that looks really, really cool. But there is a part of me, and I know you touched on this at the very end of your piece. A shiny new dock is really nice, but boy, we still need some boats that are operational and things of that nature. I guess there's a little bit of, as great as it is to open the Coleman dock, and as great as that must make a few ferry riders feel, there are some issues behind this.
Yeah, there's a little bit of a dark cloud over this opening, which is, sure, it's a nice new facility, but if you're waiting 3 hours in a nice facility, you're still waiting 3 hours.
Right. You don't want that.
In some ways, I think this construction on this started in 2017, and things were not nearly that as bad as they are right now in 2017. Mm-hmm. So at this point, you have to kind of view it as almost aspirational. This is what the ferry system could be.
Yes,
but it's not that right now, and unfortunately, it feels like we are still quite a ways out from it. We're still quite a ways out from the sort of shininess of this new dock, reflecting the quality of the service that the ferries themselves are providing.
Indeed. Need new boats, need new personnel. I mean, there's a number of different issues there, but I'm very excited to see the reopening of this dock. That's a big boost for the waterfront, too, in terms of what's happening there. All right, well, it is time to finish up here, David, and I got to check in on this one. What do you make of this trade for Paul Sewald from the Mariners? M's got rid of their veteran closer here, picked up 3 young position players from Arizona. The M's also had to make room on the team, so they also dealt away A.J. Pollock. Moment of silence for him. Okay, I'm good. Trading away Sewald, though, here, David. The M's really, it almost feels like they're selling off a key piece, but what do you think about this? This is tough. He was a good veteran leader for them.
Yeah, it's tough. He's a good guy. He's a really good pitcher. He seemed to really care about the team. Mm-hmm. There's a personal side of you that hates to see this. On the other side, the Mariners have been not great at a lot of things, but there's one thing they're really good at, which is finding no-name bullpen people and turning them into stars. And I'm fairly confident they can continue to do that. And so sell high. I think it would have been a bad idea long-term to not trade Paul Sewald. So I'm in favor.
Yeah, I know. It's such a tough one. We will see how this closer role happens through the season. And we'll see what happens to the Mariners, too. This has been such an up-and-down season. But, and we're actually releasing the show on the trade deadline. So who knows what other stuff is going to start flying around here around the league. So thank you, David, as always, for breaking this down with me. I'm going to take a deep breath on the Mariners. I know we all will, and we'll see what happens in the weeks to come. Thanks to everybody for listening to Seattle News, Views, and Brews, where you can always find out what's brewing in local politics. This podcast is on Apple and Spotify, wherever you might listen. Stitcher, check it out. And please find Seattle News, Views, and Brews on Patreon. Really need your help there, folks, to show your support and keep this show rolling. Thanks also for watching on Converge Media as well. We'll see you next time.
Seattle News, Views, and Brews is an independent production of Callanan Media Services. Copyright 2023.